the meat and potatoes of our preview here. Coming up here on Philadelphia Eagles Now, Chase Senior here with you. What an awesome matchup we have in Week 10 on Monday Night Football, prime time between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Green Bay Packers. I'm going to give you my keys to the game, top matchups to watch, what the Eagles must do to beat Green Bay to stay atop the NFC, and of course, I'll give you my prediction. And then speaking of the NFC playoff picture, the Eagles had one of the best bye weeks that you could ever have. They didn't play a game, but they moved into the number one spot in the conference because the Packers lost at home to the Carolina Panthers. The Detroit Lions lost at home to the Minnesota Vikings. And then every other team inside the NFC East also lost, and that did the Eagles favors. And so their NFC record right now is 5-1. They're 6-2 on the year, number one spot in the NFC. And you think about where they are right now. They've beaten the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and so they're ahead of them in the NFC playoff picture. They have a much better record than the Seahawks inside the NFC. They've got an opportunity to beat Green Bay here to earn that tiebreaker. They already beat the Rams, and then they play the Lions next week in Week 11. And in this game between the Eagles and the Packers, given everything that is at stake, the importance of it, the magnitude of it, and the fact that these two teams look at each other as NFC rivals, this is going to have a playoff vibe, a playoff intensity, and playoff physicality to it. And they don't call it the frozen tundra of Lambeau Field for nothing. It might be the early portion, mid portion of November, but when you go up to Green Bay, Wisconsin, in the latter months of the season, you can expect the weather to be pretty chilly. And at night, on Monday Night Football, it's expected to have a low of 25 degrees with a real field temperature of 17 degrees. Now, as of right now, as I'm recording this preview on Wednesday, no precipitation in the forecast, so no snow expected. Probability of thunderstorms, as you see, nothing. Wind gusts, though, up to 22 miles per hour. So the weather could play a factor in this football game, and it's going to have that playoff, real football type of feel to it. How the Packers stack up on both sides of the ball. First on offense, an up and down season for Green Bay. At times they've looked dominant. At other times they've fallen flat on their faces and they can't really get anything going, whether it be through the air, on the ground, or finishing in the red zone. But the numbers, as far as the totality of their 2025 season, pretty good across the board on both sides of the pill. 11th in points per game at 25.8, 8th in yards per game at 360.4, 5th in yards per play at 5.9. They are the second best third down offense in the NFL, moving the chains at a 49% clip. They're 11th in the red zone at 62.8%. The inability to capitalize in the red zone, a big issue against Carolina last week. On defense, 8th in points per game, led by Micah Parsons at 20.8. 5th in yards per game at 286.4. 2nd in yards per play at 4.6. So they haven't given up a lot of chunk plays and explosives this year. The third down defense is good, a conversion rate of 34.6%. They have struggled a little bit in the red zone, 63.6% red zone touchdown scoring percentage for the opposition. That's 23rd in the NFL defensively for Green Bay. How the Eagles stack up. They've certainly inflated some of their offensive numbers with what they did in the 2 weeks prior to the bye week. They're 10th in points per game at 26, still 24th in yards per game at 304.4, 17th in yards per play at 5.3, although we've seen more explosives the last couple of games. 28th on third downs. That has to get better. 33.3% is very low, but the positive spin, still the best red zone offense in the NFL. Once they get in the 20, they're scoring a touchdown 85% of the time. On defense, 19th in points per game, 23rd in yards per game, 16th in yards per play, 26 on third downs, but once again, really good in the red zone, that bend but don't break type of mentality and results for Vic Fangio's unit. My keys to the game and top matchups to watch. A big question for Green Bay going into this one. How do the Packers and their offense adjust without Tucker Kraft? He was making some noise, maybe solidifying himself as the best tight end in the National Football League. He tore his ACL last week, against the Carolina Panthers. You certainly hate to see that, especially with such a special player who's a dominant force physically. And what he's able to do as a blocker and a pass catcher, he was putting together an awesome season. 44 targets, 32 catches, 489 receiving yards, and average yards per catch of 15.3. So on those seam balls, those balls down the number, or just picking up yak, he was so dynamic. And in the red zone, he was also incredible. 6 receiving touchdowns on the year. An awful loss for this Packers offense and a very difficult player to replace. And so you look at this Eagles off-ball linebacker rotation, the players who are going to be tasked with covering Tucker Kraft, in addition to Cooper DeJean out of the slot, Zach Bond, Nakobe Dean, Jihad Campbell. And you look at these 3 players on your screen here, we'll see what Vic Fangio does with them. Nakobe Dean has gotten more snaps the last 2 games. He's played really well, and he's really good against the run because the Eagles were so thin at edge rusher. Jihad Campbell was being used more so as a pass rusher, not as an off-ball linebacker. And his snaps, because of that, have gone down a little bit because he's one of the smallest edge rushers in the game, if that were his primary position. And so interested to see coming out of the bye how Vic Fangio uses his off-ball linebackers as far as the snap count. Key to the game number 2, got to see this Eagles offense stay in their bag. Because in the 2 victories prior to the bye week, on the road against Minnesota, one of the top defenses in the NFL, and at home against the Giants, they're on fire. And you hope that this Eagles offense has found something, most importantly, that they found their identity. That's been an issue with the Packers all year, an inability to find their offensive identity. The Eagles offense against New York, 427 total yards. Jalen Hurts threw for 179 yards through the air, but 4 touchdowns, no picks. He was highly efficient in that game. The Eagles had finally a breakout rushing performance on the ground, running for 276 yards on the ground on 33 attempts. Saquon Barkley had that 65-yard rushing touchdown. Tank Bigsby was also awesome. They picked up 22 first downs, did give up 4 sacks, but the Giants' defensive front is very good. And the key to those 2 wins prior to the bye, no turnovers in each of them. Against the Vikings, this was a pass-happy Eagles offensive attack led by Jalen Hurts. 361 yards of total offense, 326 of them through the air. Hurts was incredible. 19 of 26, 3 tuds, no picks. They only had 45 rushing yards, 13 first downs, did give up 3 sacks, and then the big number again, 0 turnovers. And going into the bye, this is where Hurts' numbers were. And I think that he should continue to be in the MVP conversation. He has 20 touchdowns and 2 total turnovers this year. He has the most touchdowns in the National Football League, or at least did going into the bye. Tied for 3rd in passing touchdowns and passer rating. Tied for the most wins in the NFC going into the bye. And was 5th in completion rate at 70.2%. Key to the game number 3. If you can bother Jordan Love early, it really impacts him for the rest of the game. If he's able to find a groove, find a rhythm, and get his confidence early in the game, he starts to sling it around. Has no fear with the way in which he plays. He's very decisive. And with his arm talent, he looks like one of the top quarterbacks in the NFL. But if you hit him, if you sack him, if he's under duress, you can force him into bad decisions and turnovers. And then you start to see his confidence kind of dwindle and fall apart a little bit. Now, this year, he's been really good as far as his overall numbers. He's completing nearly 71% of his passes. He's thrown for more than 2,000 yards, 13 touchdowns, 3 picks, and a quarterback rating of 107.9. But in his career, he has struggled against Philadelphia. Why? Because they've put him under siege, and they forced him into a lot of mistakes. He's 1-2 against the Eagles. This year, as I just mentioned, he's completing just shy of 71% of his passes. 3 games against the Eagles, he's completing 56.6% of his throws. He's thrown for 585 yards in those 3 games, 3 touchdowns, and 4 interceptions. Key to the game number 4, which Green Bay run defense shows up? All year, they've been pretty good against the run. But as I'm about to talk about, against Carolina and Rico Dowdle, they were bad, and they got shellacked. Yards per rush this season for Jeff Hafley's unit, 4 yards per carry. That's 9th best in the NFL. Rushing yards per game, 89.4. That ranks number 5 among the 32 teams. And teams are running it a decent amount, 22.6. In games where Saquon this year has 15 or more carries, the Eagles are undefeated. And so that's an important number for the Eagles to get to and to find success on the ground. And did the Packers' rushing defense get exposed by Carolina and Dave Canales, who's a really good offensive mind, the head coach for Carolina? Rico Dowdle ran wild. And he also ran wild against the Cowboys. So he's been on a little bit of a heater of late. 25 carries for $130, 5.2 yards per carry, and 2 rushing touchdowns. And of course, the Eagles in week 8 prior to the week 9 bye, they ran for nearly 300 yards against New York. Now, the Giants do have one of the worst rushing defenses in the NFL, but an issue all year for this Eagles offense, an inability and a lack of executing. Offensive linemen missing blocks, wide receivers not really blocking downfield. I thought the execution, upon looking at the tape against New York, was really good. And Saquon ran wild, best game of the year, 14 carries for 150 yards, 10.7 yards per tote, 2 total touchdowns. And then Tank Bigsby, 9 carries for 104 yards, 11.6 yards per carry. And I love the physical element that he brings that Eagles backfield. With it being cold, a real field temperature of about 17 degrees, obviously establishing the run, finding success on the ground, going to be important for Philadelphia in this one. And then something to monitor here in this game. How do these new pieces get incorporated for the Eagles? Yes, they traded for Michael Carter prior to the bye and Jair Alexander a day before their official bye. They trade for Jalen Phillips on Monday as Howie Roseman got ahead of everybody, as he often does with contract extensions. He did that with the big trade, making that splash on Monday morning. But how often do these players play? Do they play a lot? What is their snap count? What is their usage? What are their roles in this Eagles defense? Michael Carter, elite play in the slot, and he can play a little bit of safety. He's not going to play on the outside. He shouldn't play on the outside. 85% of his career snaps have been in the slot. For Jair Alexander, he only played a couple of games with Baltimore. Gave up 5 catches on 5 targets for more than 100 yards. Isn't the same player physically. Had a bad PCL injury last year. How does he fare against his former team? At the very least, he can give you intel as far as what to expect from Matt LaFleur and Jordan Love. And then Jalen Phillips, this is a little bit easier to incorporate an edge rusher. One, you just tell him, hey, pin your ears back on an obvious passing down and get after the quarterback. Obviously on rundowns, set the edge and be disciplined with your rush and contain that rusher inside the tackle box. Or just make plays if you need to get out to the perimeter. Obviously in the secondary, it's more complex because there are more nuances in a passing play with your coverage scheme, with what transpires during the course of a play. And for Phillips, of course, he has familiarity with Vic Fangio's defense. So that's something that I'm going to be watching for. How much do Carter, Alexander, and Phillips play? What are their roles? And what type of impact can they have during this stretch run and in this game against Green Bay? So without further ado, predict the score. Eagles, Packers. Who you got in this football game, and what is your score prediction? I think these two teams are evenly matched. I think this game is going to come down to the wire. I think these two ball clubs are going to exchange punches all night long because I look at these two teams as two of the best teams in the NFL and in the NFC. At the end of the day, though, the Eagles have fared well against Green Bay. I like how their physicality matches up against the Packers. I like their big game experience a little bit better. Plus, they have the rest advantage coming off of the bye. Give me the Birds 28-25. Philadelphia picks up a huge win, and they stay in that number 1 spot in the NFC.